Philippines Literature in Every Periods with ICT 11B. Pre-colonial period.
Literature. Philippine folk tales, epics, poems, and chant existed in most ethno-linguistic groups and were passed from generation to generation through word of mouth. Biyaag ni Lamang, Life of Lamang of the Ilocanos narrates the adventures of epic hero Lamang. Other epics known to most Filipinos are the Ibalon of Bicol, Darangan, a Muslim epic, the Kudaman of Palawan, the Alim of the Ifugao, Bantugan of the Maranao, the Hinilawon of Panay, and the Tuwaang of Manobos. Pre-colonial literary. Pieces transferred, traditional narratives, speeches, and song include Tigmo in Cebuano, Bugtong in Tagalog, Patotodon in Bicol, and Paktakon in Ilonggo. Baybayin. To spell was the pre-colonial writing system in the Philippines. Some modern script in the Philippines descendants from Baybayin. Those are Hanuoo, Buhid, Tagbanwa, and the Kapampangan script, and the Bisaya script. Religion. Animism was widely practiced in the pre-colonial Philippines. This is a collection of beliefs in the idea that the world is inhabited by spirits and supernatural entities, both good and bad, and that respect must be accorded to them through worship. These entities are commonly called the Anitos, referring to spirits including household deities, deceased ancestors, nature's spirits, nymphs, and diwatas, minor gods, and demigods.
The Spanish period, 1565 to 1889. Spanish colonization of the Philippines started in 1565 during the of Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, the first Spanish governor-general in the Philippines. Literature started to flourish during his time. The spirit continued unabated until the Cavite Revolt in 1872. The Spaniards colonized the Philippines for more than 3 centuries. During these times, many changes occurred in the lives of the Filipinos. They embraced the Catholic religion, changed their names, and were baptized. Spanish influences on the Philippine literature. The first Filipino alphabet was called Alibata, was replaced by Roman alphabet. The teaching of the Christian doctrine became the basis of religious practices. The Spanish language, which became the literary language during the time, lent many of its words to our language. European legends and tradition brought here became assimilated in our song, corridos, and moromoros. Ancient literature was collected and translated to Tagalog and other dialects. Many grammar books were printed in Filipino like Tagalog, Ilocano, and Visayan. And last, our periodicals during this time gained a religious tone. And that's all the Spanish influences on the Philippine literature.
American propaganda and war in the Philippines. Propaganda period. Propaganda period was a period of Philippine history and literature when the ilustrados or intellectual Indios started calling for reforms, equality, and improvement, which lasted approximately from 1868 to 1898, although most of their activities happened between 1880 to 1895. At the turn of the 20th century, Americans and Filipinos fought bitterly for control of the Philippine Islands. The United States viewed the Pacific Islands as a stepping stone to the markets and natural resources of Asia. The Philippines, which had belonged to Spain for 300 years, wanted independence, not another imperial ruler. The administration of William McKinley proclaimed that its policies benefited both Americans and Filipinos by advancing freedom, Christian benevolence, and prosperity. McKinley used wartime propaganda to win support for his foreign policy reforms. He portrayed American expansion in the Pacific as a continuation of Manifest Destiny, appealing to popular attitudes of the times. He encouraged Americans to spread Christian civilization. The United States, he asserted, was a liberator, not a conqueror. Hawaii, Cuba, and Philippines celebrate the Independence Day of the United States on July 1998. The Philippines, which had belonged to Spain for 300 years, wanted independence, not another imperial ruler. McKinley compared the Filipinos to Native Americans, calling them savage warriors or little brown brothers. McKinley administration mastered communication technology to shape the portrayal of the war by the media. McKinley was the first to have his inauguration filmed and to have a secretary who met daily with the press. Reporters were provided with a table and chairs in an outer reception room of the executive mansion. In doing so, they constructed a persuasive version of U.S. policy in the Philippines as a divine mission that not only disguised the realities of war and conquest, but also would serve in years to come as an example of America's commitment to spreading freedom.
The colonial and early national period, 17th century to 1830. Now, let's discuss about the history of American literature. The history of American literature stretches across more than 400 years. It can be divided into 5 major periods, each of which has unique characteristics, notable authors, and representative works. The first European settlers of North America wrote about their experiences starting in the 1600s. This was the earliest American literature, practical, straightforward, often derivative of literature in Great Britain, and focused on the future. Topic 1. In its earliest days, during the 1600s, American literature consisted mostly of practical non-fiction written by British settlers, who populated the colonies that would become the United States. John Smith wrote histories of Virginia based on his experiences as an English explorer and the president of the Jamestown colony. These histories, published in 1608 and 1624, are among the earliest works of American literature. Here are the insights in American literature. Insights 1. Nathaniel Ward and John Winthrop wrote books on religion, a topic of central concern in colonial America. Insight 2. Anne Bradstreet's The Tenth Muse lately sprang up in America, 1650, may be the earliest collection of poetry written in and about America, although it was published in England. Insights 3. A new era began when the United States declared the independence in 1776, and much new writing addressed the country's future. American poetry and fiction were largely modeled on what was being published overseas in Great Britain, and much of what American readers consumed also came from Great Britain.
The Japanese period 1941 to 1945. Historical background between 1941 to 1945. Philippine literature was interrupted in its development when the Philippines was again conquered by another foreign country, Japan. Philippine literature in English came to a halt, except for the Tribune and the Philippines Review. Almost all newspapers in English were stopped by the Japanese. The weekly Liwayway was placed under strict surveillance until it was managed by a Japanese named Yoshiwara. In other words, Filipino literature was given a break during this period. Many wrote plays, poems, short stories, etc. Topics and themes were often about life in the provinces. Filipino poetry during this period. The common themes of most poems during the Japanese occupation was nationalism, country, love, life in barrios, faith, religion, and the arts. Three types of poems emerged during this period. They were haiku, tanaga, karaniwang anyo, or usual forms.
Modern literature. Modern literature, 20th and 21st century. A portion of early modern Philippine literature was written during the American period, most often as an expression of post-Hispanic nationalism by those who had either been educated in Spanish or had lived in the Bisaya-speaking cities and whose principles entered in conflict with American cultural trends. Such period of Spanish literary production between the independence of Orequeda City in 1998 and well ahead into the decade of 90s is known as Edad de Oro del Castellano en Filipinas. Some prominent writers of this era were Claro Recto, in essay Antonio Abad and Guillermo Gomez Winham. In the narrative and Fernando, Maria Guerrero and Manuel Bernambe, both in poetry. The predominant literary style was Modernismo, which was influenced by the French Renaissance and Symbolist schools, as promoted by some Latin American and Peninsular Spanish writers. So, what is modern era in literature? Modernism is a period in literary history which started around the early 90s and continued until the early 1940s. Modernist writers, in general, rebelled against clear-cut storytelling and formulaic verse from the 19th century. Examples of this would be works of Bob Ong, Ricky Lee, and Bebang Si. The poems of Maria Cecilia de la Rosa are perfect examples.